Okay. Welcome to Among the Thorns, episode 6. Previously, we've been talking about the mental aspects of pornography addiction. Specifically, we've talked about the decision centers of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, just a little bit, as well as dopamine in our last episode, and certain other neurotransmitters. Now we're going to look at a third aspect within the brain, which is going to call them triggers. Now, we'll kind of break it down. I'm trying something a little bit different to see if this I don't get the flickering, when I cut out the background. So we'll find out. Test it again. But let's get right into it. Now, I want to actually start with a particular verse because I want this to kind of be in the forefront of your mind as we go over this topic. This is Proverbs 26:11. It says, "As a dog returns to its vomit, so a fool repeats his foolishness." And if you don't know what that means, you probably haven't owned a dog as a pet, but they will puke. They will then go back and eat that puke. It's disgusting. Here we have this being related to a fool returning to his foolishness. So even though he doesn't necessarily like what he did, he still goes back to it. Gross. But we're going to talk about triggers. What we're talking about in that regard is these are encounters that start the brain down a certain pathway. You can think about it like a domino cascade or the lighting of a fuse. You have basically a event, something that you've run into, right? So an obvious trigger would be a pop-up ad, that actually has explicit content. It's going to tempt you to click it. Once you click it, you're going to go to the website, you're going to start browsing, you're going to start looking, you're getting into that addicted, repeated behavior. But other things can also serve as triggers, even things that you might not expect. Now, there are others. It might be that you see a particularly attractive person when you're out and about, and it starts you have that temptation, starts your brain down a certain path. It could be that you see a billboard. It could be a cartoon, anime. I've talked about that previously where I recognized, even though I did not go back to the vomit, right, I was tempted. It increased the levels of temptation by watching, certain cartoons with scantily clad females in it. Even though it wasn't technically lewd, it was, I guess, borderline, and it caused an increase in temptation. Well, those things can serve as triggers that will cause you to repeat certain behaviors. So you have these pathways that get laid out in the brain because of your activity. So you start something, you do something, so it's a behavior you've done in the past. You see a picture of an attractive lady, you click on it. Or you then think to yourself, okay, I'm tempted. You go to certain sites to find, pornographic material. You click on that, you go down it. Well, by doing that, you have laid a pathway in the brain. By doing it over and over again, that pathway becomes deeper. It becomes a habit that, you almost can't avoid. Well, a trigger is the start of that pathway. It's the thing that starts that event. And so we have to learn, as one tactic, we have to learn what are our triggers, because they may be different things. A very interesting thing is, okay, I'm gonna explain it like this. Okay, as a young man, you're a teenager. Teenage boys are notorious for taking really long showers. What are you doing in the shower as a teenage boy? You're going to get clean, blah, blah, blah. Well, you're probably also going to examine things. I'm thinking of a way to say this without it being disgusting, but teenage boys are going to do what teenage boys do. So you're gonna fill in the blank, right? Well, and this is why this is important. You did that activity, right? You masturbated in the shower. Well, it has now linked those two things in your brain. Going into the shower is a trigger that starts a certain chain of events that leads you to, playing with yourself. So that's a trigger. And so by doing that repeatedly, you can actually find that when you get in the shower, you find yourself tempted all of a sudden, you want to repeat behavior. So here is a little bit of a scary thing, though. This is daunting, but it also really heavily explains certain addictive behaviors, certain things that we get, trapped into. And that is the moment you enter that temptation, the moment that trigger gets activated, your brain releases a lot of dopamine. At that moment, they've even done studies, and they've found that the dopamine release at the beginning of that temptation, at the beginning of that trigger, can sometimes be greater than the dopamine release at the end of it, the end event. And so that's one of the reasons it can be so addictive, and it starts you down that path, and you find yourself doing something that you're like, why am I doing this? 10 minutes ago, I was fine. I had no temptation to do this. Suddenly, I find myself having to resist the urge to go look up tube sites and different things. And so that can be why when you start that event, when that trigger gets activated, dopamine is released. Remember, what is dopamine? It gives you pleasure, but also it's that reward chemical. It's there to reinforce and repeat behavior. So that's rough. That's scary. Because when you realize that, you realize, okay, the moment I see something, the moment that trigger activates, is the moment that your addictive behavior begins. So what do? Let's talk about a tactic or two. And this is going to be something that it's going to take repeated behavior to overcome. But we've got to start somewhere, right? So for one tactic, so I've said this before, I think, but to say it again, distraction is more effective than resistance. This is true a lot of times in warfare. This is true in martial arts, different things like that. It's true in sleight of hand. So in sleight of hand, you might be talking to someone, you've got your hands animated, you're doing something up here. Their gaze looks up at this hand, but your other hand might be stealing their wallet, all right? So you're distracting them. When it comes to distraction in the realm of, mental addictions or so on and so forth, that distraction is going to come in the form of, okay, I recognize a trigger's been activated. I saw a video, I was looking through Facebook, and somebody decided that they would just put up a photo of themselves in a bathing suit. Great. I recognize, because I know that my behavior has went that way in the past, that has started an increase in temptation that has activated a trigger. What do? Well, I need to first distract myself. The last thing that you want to do is fixate on the fuse. You realize a fuse has been lit, right? What do? Do you go over to that fuse and start blowing on it? No, stop. Making it probably, go faster. No, you want to get your mind off of that thing. You want to think of something that's the polar opposite of it. You want to, if you saw a picture of a attractive lady on the beach in a bikini, you want to go and, I don't know, look up. Actually, you don't want to be looking on, the last thing you want to do is then get your phone and start scrolling or start looking at things, because that, again, that's also another kind of trigger. That's also another thing that we use that goes down and starts a path that leads to falling to that temptation. So you might want to get up and go for a jog, you might want to do something physical in that regard. Do some push-ups, go and do something else. Watch a movie, if as long as that's not a trigger. You have to know what your triggers are. You want to do the opposite of that. Another thing is you might go and eat some candy. Might seem a little weird, but remember, what does sugar do? Sugar also causes a release of dopamine. Because sugar is such a good concentrated source of energy in nature, our body is like, hey, that's a good thing, eat that more. Naturally speaking, you wouldn't have very much sugar in your diet in the past, whereas now it's very abundant. So now it causes problems with obesity and other health problems. That's not this video, right? But still, go and get you a cookie and eat it. Go and do something else, right? And go and write down, journal something. I don't know. And then afterwards, reward yourself with a cookie. You are trying to, distract yourself because, so I've got to pull it out of the void behind me. There, it's in front of me. Got an hourglass, right? When that event started, it started an hourglass. Your brain is going to go down that pathway. It's going to keep encouraging you to follow that to the end. It's a waiting game, basically. You need to distract yourself until that trigger is complete, till it's done and gone, and then you return to your default state. So you are trying to be patient, you're trying to outwait it, but the best thing, just waiting, you're going to fixate on whatever that is. So you need to distract yourself during that time. To read Proverbs 16, another proverb, it is better to be patient than powerful. It is better to have self-control than to conquer a city. This is the verse that I've sought to internalize over the years, sought to memorize, to help me combat anger problems. It is better to be patient than powerful. It is better to have self-control than to conquer a city. Well, in this case, rather than trying to fight this with sheer willpower, we're going to distract ourselves and we're going to wait it out. And it will be gone. Now, once that trigger starts, that temptation hits you, and you feel like you're inevitably going to do the action at the end of that, right? Which then leads to shame and guilt and deepens the pathway so that you're more likely to do it later, right? Well, you are seeking to distract yourself, but you're not just trying to win this battle, right? You are paving the way for future victory. So in resisting, you've got this pathway. You're kind of adding alternate pathways. So the event, the trigger is still there, but what do you do when that trigger happens? Well, instead of trigger, lust, desire, temptation, eventual falling to sin, let's have it be, okay, that trigger happens. Well, that is one of the possible outcomes, but let's lay another pathway. Oh, the trigger happened. I'm going to go do some push-ups and eat a cookie. It's a light pathway. But if you continue to do that, that pathway deepens. Eventually, the other one kind of gets buried up with detritus within the mind, and you're more likely to do the other thing. You're more likely to go do push-ups. You're more likely to do a little exercise. The physical portion of that is for the distraction, although maybe exercise isn't the great because also we don't want to do exercise, so you're more likely to avoid it because it's unpleasant. I don't know. You find what works for you. The point, though, is that you are seeking to do two things. One, you're seeking to distract yourself. It's a waiting game. You're going to wait it out. You're going to win. Two, you're seeking to lay out alternate pathways in your brain so that the outcome isn't always the same, so that you're not just guaranteed to fail. This does work, but this is also not going to give you immediate victory in the sense that, oh, okay, I did this once, I'm good. Now, from now on, I don't have to worry about that. No, the trigger is going to be there. The pathway in your brain is going to be there. You have to recognize what those things are, try to avoid them. And over time, you can lay down, again, pave the way for future victory. So I hope this was helpful. What did I clock in at? Just under 15 minutes. Not too bad. Like, subscribe, so that, as I put the videos up, you'll see them. Otherwise, you're not going to know about it unless I send it to you and pester you to watch it, like I often do with my brothers. But thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.